Hello and welcome to the Business of Authority. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And today we're coming at you with the obligatory ChatGPT episode.
I am so excited about this. I think I'm going to learn as much as our audience does on this one.
I'm no expert, not even intermediate, to be honest, but I'll be very interested to share my experiment so far. And I have several students and members in Ditcherville who are seriously using it. And its friends, Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and all that stuff. And I guess technically we've been using versions of it. If you have an Android phone, it's what the image recognition. If you search your images for grass and it somehow finds all the pictures that have grass in it, it's like a similar thing going on in the background. Whatever, voice computing, all of that stuff. It's sort of AI everywhere in all the things. But ChatGPT obviously caught the world by storm. And actually, dear listener, if that's not obvious to you, I can tell you that I'll get the numbers wrong, but it gained more monthly active users in like 3 weeks than Facebook did in 3 years or something like that. I mean, it was like, It was an order of magnitude more meteoric.
It was a game changer.
Yeah, it's that particular interface, being able to feel like you're chatting with it, like you might chat with a colleague in Slack or in Facebook Messenger. It is a wild experience the first time you do it. So the implications are enormous for probably most businesses. We'll see how it plays out over time, but we thought it would be fun to have a sort of where are we now with it, and what are the use cases that we like, we don't like, what's it good at, what's it bad at so far, and maybe this will be something where the audience writes in and we do a follow-up or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to be an outdated episode in like 3 months.
Right. Well, in 3 months, we'll have AIs doing the show for us.
Of course. Better than we did it ourselves.
Exactly. Just have 2 robots talking, and then everyone will have their robots listening, and then their robots will report back on whether or not the episode was any good. Tell me if I enjoyed this week's TVOA. So, okay, so let's start here. Since I think you're probably the newbier one, what?
I'm the civilian in this conversation, and I've used it obviously, but I don't approach it from a tech development standpoint. I'm a user.
Okay, so for people who maybe have not tried it yet, what was your experience the first time you tried it? What did you do, and what was your reaction?
Oh, I loved it. It was like magic. I was asking it weird questions, and I was picking like little things in my point of view, like specific words, and saying, "Tell me about," or my favorite query is "explain." I like to hear how it thinks. Mm-hmm. So I would say, explain, authority or market authority for solo consultants. That was one that I tried. There were a few like that I tried. And then the other thing that was really interesting is I had a client, and he sent me a Slack, and he said, "Oh my God, you have to look at this," because what he did was he said, and he's a civilian also. He said, "Design a talk for me on this topic. What should it include?" And it actually laid out this really thoughtful talk about this subject, including some citations. And then he asked it more questions, and he asked it, "Can you pull in, some things that were written by, inserting his own name?" And it pulled that up. Mm-hmm. And so, in 5 minutes, he had something that could have taken him a lot longer.
Right. It's wild. I'm trying to think of the person's name. He was the longest running writer on The Simpsons. His name is escaping me. It's kind of long and unusual. But when interviewed about, how did you write that much amazing stuff, some of the most iconic episodes in that series. And he was like, the night before, I will write the worst first draft I can. It'd just be garbage. Garbage, stream of consciousness, vomiting onto the page, non sequiturs, it didn't matter. And then the next morning, all you had to do was edit it. And I was like, that is so great, because I certainly have had the feeling of the 2 different modes of the initial pen to paper writing. What am I going to write about? And then the pen starts going, and you're like, ah, and it's like you kind of you kind of lose yourself in it, and it's a mess and things are flying everywhere. And then coming back later with fresh eyes and editing it is just such a different mode. It's so much easier, and sometimes you might be like, this is unsalvageable, but that's not often the case, at least with me. And I can come back like really clear-eyed and edit it, which is a just crazy easy. It's almost like someone else wrote it at that point, and then when I go to edit it, it's really easy. So why does this matter? It matters because ChatGPT is great at giving you that first draft or an outline. Or I was like, give me a table of contents for a book called Ditching Hourly that talks about, da 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 da, and it gave me like, it could have been it could have been it. I'm like, wow. And then and it's like, okay, what would be the subsections for each one of these chapters? Boom, does a decent job. Not amazing, but good enough for me to go, this one's weak. It should be this, right? And it's almost like it's not like a writing partner, but it has a similar kind of feel to it. It's like throw a bunch of mediocre, sometimes not so mediocre, but throw a bunch of like decent stuff on this topic at me, and it'll give it to you in this really bland voice. It's the writing voice is extremely flat, and you get it, and you're like, oh, I just need to pump this up, throw this out, replace with this, and all of a sudden you're going like straight to editor mode at the big picture level, and then you can zoom in to the individual parts, and then you get into more creator mode again, but with a much smaller bite to chew. It's like, oh, I just need to write this section.
It's like having a writing assistant, like I've hired writers before, and they don't, get your voice necessarily. But if you're doing an article that has research, they're pulling things together and they're starting to assemble it for you, and they lay out the framework, and then you have to make it yours.
Right. Yeah. I like that better. It's not a writing partner. It's definitely a one-way street, but I like it as an assistant. It's like a research assistant or a writing assistant. And it's not that, no, you actually couldn't Google around and get this, because then you would be directly ripping someone off. Like, because you're not going to find that. Like, people aren't going to be like, hey, here's a BuzzFeed article about the table of contents for your next book. It's just not on the internet.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you could Google for it.
That's what makes it AI, right? Because it's pulling all those things together. I mean, there's, some dangerous undertones to that as well, but it's pulling those things together in a way that we don't have easy access to now. And actually what I think is also interesting is if you have a chat on something you really don't know very much about, and it's your way to figure out like what pathways might be interesting. I mean, that's also the danger, because you're relying on somebody else's interpretation, an artificial, really, interpretation of things that are out there. It doubles down on the things that are already there versus exploring the new and the interesting and the quirky.
Right. Yeah, it's generative. I mean, that's the thing. So we might as well wander into that territory, just so if people haven't already heard this debate. For stuff where it's really important that the answer is correct, it's probably not the greatest. It's because it's just trained on the internet, and the internet is not necessarily right, and it's full of opinions and lies and all sorts of things that can bubble up. So for I wouldn't. Hopefully surgeons aren't like, how should I do this operation? How should I fly this plane? But for things that are more creative and kind of like a lot of people, I've heard it described as, it's like having a sort of infinite number of interns for free. It's like something that a freshman in college would be capable of pulling together, and maybe it's not going to be great. Maybe it will be sometimes, but it's definitely not something that you want to stake your life on.
Right.
Right. It's more like I like it in a sort of suggestive way when it comes to creating new content, or creating, like we said, like a talk or a book outline, or,
right.
What we really should have done was asked it what this episode should be about, and had it create an outline. That would have been hilarious. But okay,
we'll do that next week for a new topic.
Okay, so that, I think if you haven't played with ChatGPT, I think that's a really good use case for it, especially if you've got a lot of writing to do or other kinds of content creation. I think you'll find that it's like, it gives you a bit of a superpower.
Yeah, it's helpful, and especially for the people in our audience, because we're all working on building our expertise, building our authority. So, I mean, you know something about your field. So you're not the freshman in college trying to write a paper. You're the expert, and maybe this brings you some data or a study or a viewpoint that just hasn't come up before.
Mm-hmm.
So I like it for that reason, as long as it's a tool, it's not the answer, but it's a tool.
Right, right. So this is a really unusual, this is a weird use case, but I found it really helpful. Probably not everybody is going to need it for this, but since it is trained on the internet, it kind of has the opinion of the sort of collective unconscious of people who have posted stuff online. So it's, it's skewed and not perfect and not true, like we were saying before. But I used it as like a sparring partner for some of my maybe more controversial ideas. So things that people like to argue about. And one of the ones, how did I phrase it? It was like, I was basically trying to get at the difference between, if you should be working hard, if people should work hard. Mm-hmm. And I was like, should people work hard? Or is hard work good? Something like that. Mm-hmm. And it brought back like a sort of a good answer. It was kind of like a cross between an inspirational poster and like maybe a Bible verse or something about like the benefits of hard work. And of course you shouldn't work too much, but you shouldn't, but laziness is devil's, idle hands are the devil's playground or whatever. And I was like, okay, but what about, is it okay to retire? And it was like, yes, after, it's fine to enjoy the fruits of your, and it gave like a really professorial kind of answer about, yeah, it's fine to retire. And then I was like, is it okay to retire when you're 20? And it was like, it would not, and it would say no. And then I was like, well, at what age is it okay to retire? And then it gave a vague, dodge the question kind of answer. So a lot of my message is make more money in less time. So when someone gets to that stage, they're faced with this like weird pseudo retirement feeling of like, well, if I know how much is enough and I've got enough, then I don't need to work 40 hours a week, or maybe even 20 hours a week, or maybe even 10 hours a week. So now what do I do? A lot of people just feel guilty. They feel lazy. They fill the time with busyness, like unproductive busyness. It's an issue. And so I was kind of wondering what the collective wisdom of the internet was. And it would not agree that it was okay to work, less than like 30 hours a week until you're 65. And it was like, okay.
It absorbed the collective unconscious, or in this case, conscious.
Right.
Consciousness.
Yeah, consciousness. Right. So it was an interesting sparring partner. It was allowed me to kind of hone my line of questioning to back it into a corner, but then it would just jump out of it. It would just dodge the question when it finally got caught. So it was wild.
That feels like, I mean, it would be interesting to just do, but it feels like one of those things where the kind of question where you're never going to get satisfaction, because it's ethereal. Mm-hmm. So it requires sort of, in my mind, it requires an extra level of thought over, let me pull all these things together and then, run these through some kind of a artificial brain, mm-hmm. versus the collective unconscious. And so that's why it's actually a worry I have about this, because I feel like things that are systemic, like, you have to work a lot, systemic racism, sexism, homophobia, like all those things that are built into some of the stuff on the internet, it just makes me wonder, like, so what do you get back?
Right. Yeah, it's an open question. And I think from my understanding of the news reports, the people who are building this stuff put in tons of guardrails that are sort of around things like that, which is interesting when you think of, I mean, it's understandable, but it's also like, well, who's making the decisions about those guardrails?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's been my experience that different ones have different guardrails. So it's almost like, I mean, you can tell it, ChatGPT, pretend you're a tough but fair manager of a team of developers, and one of the developers blows off their stand up. What would be a good email for me to write to let them know that that's not okay? And you can tell it to kind of
Whoa, that's pretty
create,
cool.
yeah, right.
Managers everywhere, new solution.
Yeah, you don't know the half of it. I know some people building stuff on the API that is amazing. So this is just like you manually doing it. So you can kind of tell it to inherit a personality, or if you're using one of the image generator ones, which is not ChatGPT, but like Midjourney, for example, you can tell it to do things in the style of Picasso or in the style of The
Yeah.
Incredibles and stuff like that. So you can have it do that, but I think I think an area for people, big companies that are building and releasing and monetizing these large language models, an area for them to compete is in the guardrails area, where certain things like are just not allowed to be said by this one or that one, but these other ones see it differently. There'll be like a more, I don't know, like there'll be a more Republican one or a more libertarian one or a more Democratic one or a more woke one or a less woke one. And I'd see that as something that will play out over the next probably couple of years, like the different capabilities. Even if they're all using the same underlying language models, it's like the guardrails thing is going to make a differentiation between the different ones, I would think.
Well, when I did one of the searches, and I forget the exact parameters of it, but I said something about what books are available on, and I can't remember if it was on Authority or I think it was Consulting, and it listed they were some good choices, but they were all white men. So I said, do you have any books by, let's call it consulting. I don't know if that was it. Do you have any books on consulting by women? Why, yes, we do. And so they list, I like 3 or 4. And then I said, do you have any by people of color? And they list 5, but I had to laugh because one of them was Michael Zapersky, who is a white man. I was like, no, got it kind of right, but you missed it on this one. So, yeah. And so somebody has to take that extra step right now to say, oh, what other voices are there in this? And obviously you could ask that question other ways. Things aren't always obvious. Like, how do you know if it's a book, if the person is of color or not? Like, how do you know? So I
Right.
don't know how it works, but it was just interesting because I found one obvious mistake in the results. But so I just think that, it's a tool, but it's not perfect, obviously. So we just have to apply some savvy to it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So let's get out of the clouds here for a second and talk about an application of this technology that we've been using for a couple of weeks, which is an app called Podium that you can upload your audio, your MP3 file, and it goes through and creates the show notes and highlights and quotes and timestamps and chapters with summaries and timestamps. And it takes about 45 seconds and it's free. And you tell me what's your, I did one, read it. I was like, wow, that's pretty close to my recollection of what we talked about. It's not perfect, but you're the one that's using it. So like, what's your experience been with using those as a starting point for the show notes?
It was awesome. In fact, I wouldn't even use the transcription except that they don't do quotes. I don't like the way they pick quotes, and it doesn't tell you who said it because there's 2 of us. So
Right.
I'd have to go by memory. Like, did Jonathan say that? Did I say that? But the reason I love it is because I look at the outline, and that usually gives me the 3 to 5 bullets that I use on the show notes themselves, and then it'll give me some idea of where I want to go for quotes. But what'll happen is by structuring the show notes, and it allows me to structure the email that I send to my list, it then I can go back in and pull the quotes really fast because I know I can find the sections that we're talking about really quickly. And I like it when the quotes line up with the show notes. They don't always perfectly, but so yeah, I felt like, let me think how much time it saved me the first time I did it. I would say it probably saved me at least 15 minutes, maybe more, maybe more.
Yeah,
And
cool.
because I remember, because you did that, and then like you gave me the drug, and I was hooked. And then the second time, you didn't have that right away. Remember, you were going to do something else, and so I didn't have it. And so I went back and did it the old way, and I found myself grumbling because, oh yeah, okay, I don't have that now. That's 15 minutes I can't, get back again. But yeah, it's one of those things that, at least for me, I got used to it really fast. I wouldn't rely on it as show notes, because it still has that artificial voice. Like, it doesn't feel
Yeah, it's
like
so
either
flat.
one of us. Yeah, it's flat. Yeah, that's the right word, I think. So yeah, but it gets the point in there. It's the writing assistant again, although in this case it's a thinking assistant, because it's listening to your words and deciding what to do with them. So yeah, for any podcast hosts who are doing this themselves, I recommend trying it. But the other side of this is, if you are outsourcing, make sure that what you're getting back doesn't sound like it went through an AI interface.
Right. Yeah, because for sure, like that, for sure, like all of the podcast people that are doing show notes as their business, I mean, they got to be all over this. They've probably been all over this for a while, because ChatGPT is not the first. ChatGPT like popularized it and brought it into the public eye, but the AI people are like, why is everyone so excited about this? This is nothing. This has been around for 4 years. So, right, but not, you couldn't talk to it though. The interface is so easy to use. But so for podcasters in the audience, I want to like get a little bit inside baseball on this, because we also use something else called Descript. I'll just be quick about this for the podcasters. With Descript, you can upload the individual tracks, and it will say who said what. And we used to do that. We still do that, but that was we've been doing that for a long time. Which is speech recognition, speech to text, which is more AI.
Yeah, not perfect, but it'll suffice.
Right. And you can automatically take all the ums and ahs and knows and so's, so that, and so, and all that stuff, just deletes it. And if you tell it to, and then I can give that, and then I give that to Rochelle, and then you would go through and do the show notes. This new thing, I can't give it the two files. It needs to be one file. So the reason why I didn't get it to you that day is because I need to edit the audio first, turn it into one, and then
that's right,
put the final through Podium, which is the thing that does the highlights and show notes and stuff. And in theory, I could do that before I edited it, but there would be stuff in there that, in theory, it could pick up stuff that ended up getting cut out of the show. You know what I mean? So
right.
Anyway, for just a little process thing, but there we are using two different AIs to like produce the show. Just wait until Podium does like, you can give it a Canva template and it'll do the artwork for you. Right? Wouldn't that be cool?
That'd be awesome. Yeah. I love it. Although that's the easiest part of this, but
hey, time is time.
Yeah, exactly.
So what else? Okay, here's a wild one, especially for the non-technical people in the audience. I've barely experimented with this, but even with my 15 minutes of goofing around with it, it was like pretty impressed, which was this. ChatGPT hand code a web page for a solo consultancy that is, looks good on desktop, looks professional, looks trustworthy, and looks good on mobile phones as well, and has like a hero section, a section for 3 different services, and blah 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 blah. I just described a web page, and boom, it puked out the HTML and the CSS, and you just open them in your browser, and it's like a website.
I love that. Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
And it was like the kind of website that I would have built in like 2004 by hand. I mean, it was very straightforward, very basic, but it worked. And
yeah, I mean, I assume there's no buttons and things like that.
Yeah, there were.
So get out.
No, swear to God. I mean, it wouldn't go somewhere. Like, so there was even a form to created a form for you to like join an email list or send it a contact request. And it didn't, you'd have to hook it up to something.
You have to hook it up. Yeah.
But it was like, and then I was like, the colors look a little amateurish. Can you make it more professional, a little more modern, make it look more like, marieforleo.com and use the colors from there. And it's just like, yep, okay. And here you go. I asked it to pull in some images and illustrations that would be appropriate for consulting services, and it did.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
pretty amazing. Think about I can't help but think about the implications of that for, for solo web designers, but also just for the services that have these kind of modular build your website, kind of like starter website services. I mean, that could totally change that business too.
yeah, and I was just goofing around with HTML and CSS, which is not really how most people build websites anymore. I mean, yeah, they do and they don't. It's complicated, but there are videos online. The thing that made me think to do it was two things. One, someone forwarded a video to me of a guy who asked ChatGPT to build an iOS to-do app, a to-do app that would run as an app in the App Store on iOS, or that you could put in the App Store and run on an iPhone. And, and said stuff like, when I swipe right on it, or when I tap a to-do and it's completed, it will animate to the bottom of the list. If I tap it again, it'll reanimate back to the top. When it's done, it'll be grayed out. He just described what he wanted it to look like. And the thing wrote the code. He threw it into Xcode, which is the development environment, and the thing ran. And he'd ask it for changes, or there'd be a bug, and he would, instead of debugging it, he would say, "There's a bug online, yada yada. What can you fix it?" And just produce the code. Don't rewrite the whole thing. Just produce that section, so you didn't have to wait while it typed it, because it types out the whole app, and it fixed it. It just fixed the bugs.
Wow.
And granted, it's not a game-changing app, a to-do app, and the more complicated the app was, at a certain point it's going to be easier to code it than for a developer. At a certain point, it's going to be easier to code it than to try and describe an interface in a narrative fashion. Right. But for someone who's not a coder, that's trying to learn how to get started, and I mean, if the tools got, call it 30% better, and were in this case, and it was built into Xcode, right? So he wasn't copying and pasting it from a web browser. If it was built right into Xcode and it was maybe 30% better, it's going to allow an extremely new iPhone developer to build stuff that's pretty cool, like meaningfully useful.
Okay, so I got a question. So would that work with, let's say I wanted things that I'm using Zapier for. So let's say I wanted to connect Slack with ConvertKit. So somebody joins a Slack channel, I want them added to my mailing list. Is there a way to do that? I mean, obviously Zapier's using AI now, but...
Right. There would need to be a way. Right now, you give it text and it returns text. So you'd need to be able to take the text and put it somewhere, which is not the way Zapier works. So there's nowhere to put it. Like you
well, I'm thinking without Zapier is my point. Could I just go into Slack and say, go into Chat GPT and say, connect my Slack, or build a connection between my Slack and ConvertKit?
In theory, you could. I don't know if it's aware of those APIs, but in theory, what you do is you'd have to say something like, give me a serverless node function that I'm going to host in AWS Lambda that is going to talk to the Slack API and is going to talk, what was the other one you said? ConvertKit, and or whatever you said. It's like, talk to the two APIs. They exist, and it could write code that would do that. In fact, wait, I'm trying to think. Yes, so there are examples that I have seen where it goes to the API, it knows the documentation, and writes the code. Like, you don't even need to know the API. Like, you as the developer, or not even the developer, the prompt engineer, it just knows. It's not always right. So then you run it, and it may or may not work. If it doesn't work, you say, I'm getting an error like this. Can you try and fix that? And I was talking to a developer yesterday who's been building on top of the API only recently, but extensively in the past week or so. And one of the problems in this particular use case is that it's trained on data that's not right up to date. So I think the training data, the bulk of the training data, I want to say was like through 2019. So like if the API changed in that time. It's going to have documentation from back then. It's not checking it in real time now. So that's problematic.
You lost me at Lambda anyway.
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. So
it was that would be too complicated. So I was just thinking about it because Zapier has some cool stuff, but there's a lot of stuff it doesn't do.
right.
And like specific things that it just doesn't, it doesn't exist. And there's not the parameters for a non-coder to connect them. And it would be cool if there was a way to sort of bypass that without having to feel like a developer.
Right. No, I don't think so, because it would require that two things. It would require that it wrote code, and it would require that the scenario was such that there was a place you could paste the code without having to start your,
Right.
create your own web server or server of
Right.
some kind. So probably that is a bridge too far. But
Oh, I know it is for me.
someone could correct me. I mean, maybe there's maybe someone's working on an interface. Maybe Zapier is working on an interface where you just say to it, I want you to watch the RSS feed at jonathanstark.com/RSS. And when you see a new thing there, I want you to post it in a format that is appropriate for Twitter to Twitter. And I want you to post it in a format that is appropriate for LinkedIn over there. And make sure that you use trending hashtags that are watched by freelancers and consultants. So you're telling it more what you want. It's still pretty prescriptive what you tell it, but you can leave it a lot of wiggle room to make up its own mind about certain things.
Yeah, well, that's what's interesting. The way you phrase the last part of that is, so instead of saying, here's the 5 hashtags. Oh, go see what hashtags are used. Why not? It's like getting a second opinion.
Yeah, right. There's so many. So it's so funny if you think of like the Gartner hype cycle for technology adoption, and if you look back a couple of years, if you look back to 2010-ish, so 13 years, it was mobile and social right after that. Those were like the big waves. But there are also dozens of other things on there that just disappeared. They never got super hyped. And back then, AI was even one of them. So now, if you fast forward to like say 2020, it was still AR, robotics, and the big one, blockchain and crypto. And I sort of keep tabs on these different sort of technologies, play around with them, and see if there's anything interesting there. And I got bored of once I understood blockchain, I got bored of it pretty quickly. I'm like, there's some interesting new primitives that are novel for the web that could be cool. The ledger, the idea of a token or a coin, and the idea of a wallet built into the browser, all very interesting and new. But the one thing that people would always ask is like, well, what's the use case? And there's like, well, money, like Bitcoin, okay. And like, well, but that's not even great, or it's only good for very narrow use cases. And like, what are the other use cases? NFTs, smart contracts, the sort of, I forget the DAOs, like, it's just like, okay, interesting, but it very much felt like a solution looking for a problem. ChatGPT feels like the early days of mobile, where all of a sudden in maybe 2009, 2010, everybody at the bus stop was glued to their iPhone. Everybody walking down the street, everybody in line at the bank and at Starbucks, they were everywhere. And it's the same with ChatGPT. It's everywhere. My kids knew what it was before I did. It's like everybody's talking about it. The use cases are just like leaves on the ground. There's just like, they're everywhere. Anything that, it is like unbelievable. And it feels to me like that wave that it was like mobile, where civilians instantly see use cases. It's pretty rare.
Yeah, it's almost like embedded in what you just said is try it. Like for whatever in the authority business or whatever it is that you're doing, it might be an interesting experiment. It doesn't take long, right? I mean, you enter the question, it starts typing, types faster than I do. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting way to look at the challenges that we have, the problems that we have, or the things that vex us. Like I keep thinking about what you said about, writing a review letter for a developer who's, kind of gone off the rails. I could use it for my HOA when we have somebody doing something they're not supposed to. I mean, those kinds of things I think those are just really fascinating, and it's easy to kind of get used to it. Right. I was just reading a book that was written in the mid 90s, and it was it took place globally. And of course they had no cell phones. Well, they had some, but it wasn't the same. They certainly didn't have smartphones. And so I was laughing. I would read a line and I'm like, well, it wouldn't happen that way now. You just call them, you text them. It was, it becomes so ubiquitous that you don't remember what life was like before.
Right. Yeah. This, and there are plenty of alarmists, and I don't think they're baseless. Their concerns are certainly not baseless. We don't have the answers. Ask ChatGPT when it's gonna take over the world, I suppose. But there, I mean, we've raised some of the issues. Like, you cannot trust it. You need to sort of take it with a grain of salt. Use it for what it's worth, and for if you want, and if you don't, then don't. But maybe one last thing we could leave it on or bring up was specifically for people in an authority business. There are a lot of these little administrative or like writing assistant, or go to the Google document at this URL, let's say you wrote a new book and you had the manuscript in a Google Doc and you wanted me to write a review. Just like, go to this URL and write a nice review or like summarize this book. Tell me what the main points are. Pull out the highlights. I'll read those. And then, okay, based on these, what should my review be? And then it like maybe give me a starting point. And I'd be like, that's garbage, but it gives me an idea. Yep. So, okay. So all of those little writing tasks or whatever, but there's this, I have like 1,000 hours of audio, public audio from this show, other shows, my other shows I've been on, and it's essentially unsearchable. And it would be amazing, and it seems like a perfect job for AI, to train one of these models on the audio and make it into snippets, or make it at least timestamps so you could jump to a particular point or idea or phrase or something. And I mentioned that on Twitter. I was like, I've got 1,000 hours of audio. What should I do? And I was hoping someone would be like, there's a service where you can upload it and yada, yada, yada. And a couple of people who I know were pretty surprised by my willingness to do such a thing. And I was like, why?
Yeah. What was the surprise?
And it was a bunch of people. So, and I'm sure some of them are listening. So it's not, this is sort of a pastiche of opinions that I'm probably not getting exactly right. But there's a little bit of, well, how are you going to monetize that? Because if all of your ideas are just in ChatGPT, then who needs you, right? And I have a couple of responses to that, but that doesn't worry me. We could talk about why. Mm-hmm. And another thing was, for a show, like say I interview someone, right? Or let's say it's you and me, and I want to upload the audio to make it searchable. And you're like, no, I don't want that. I don't want my thoughts or ideas shared with these big tech companies who are just going to get rich off of them and me not. Then what do, right? If there's two people on the recording and someone's like, no, right. I don't consent to being put into the model, to be put into the AI, or put my words into the AI. And like, I suppose that's valid. I don't exactly understand the motivation, but that's okay. I don't need to. I take it for what it is.
That's kind of the pie issue.
Right. The way I see it is like, stuff's public already, and it's on the internet, it's Googleable. Let's just say, just speaking for myself, my own stuff, it's all out there, and I want to further the mission, ridding the world of hourly billing. So from a mission perspective, which I think a lot of authorities can resonate with this, from a mission perspective, I want all, especially my best ideas, to appear when someone is looking for them. So right now what that looks like is Google search. And when the ideas come up, they are probably summarized on Google's search results page, and no one ever would go to my site. Like you can, like 0-click searches, I think they're called, where you search Google and it gives you the answer right in the search results. And you don't click on anything.
Right.
You might not even notice who said it or whatever. So already there's this thing that's happening where you're kind of not getting credit anyhow. And I just think it boils down to, it's like, do you want your ideas to make a difference or not? And if everybody is searching in this place, wouldn't you want your ideas in there? Right. So like if I wanted new freelancers who were, going into ChatGPT and saying like, what should my hourly rate be as an entry level React developer? I want it to say, well, the going rate right now is in your area is probably like $100 an hour, but you might want to consider other business models. Da, 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 da. There are other ways to price. You don't have to bill by the hour because for these reasons, ask and I'll tell you more. So like, I want that in there. Do I care if I get credit for it? Not really. I mean, it would be nice for my ego, but I don't really care as long as it's making a difference.
Well, it goes back to the mission, I think. But the other thing is, I mean, I don't get the concern, certainly on a podcast level, because, unless you're behind a paywall, anybody can listen to your podcast. Like,
right.
Why wouldn't you want to make it easier for them to find what they need? Like, I don't need somebody to listen to an hour if they can get, value in 3 minutes. That's okay. You're not hurting my feelings. Take what you need. It's a gift.
Right.
Use it as you will. I think, where I have drawn the line, it was more when people would say, oh, could you do a full transcript and could you like cut and paste these things together for me? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm doing a free resource. We put a lot of work into it. Here it is. Go find it. But if we have a way to pull those things and to do it easily, like why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, people have reasons. I'm not arguing them because it's how they feel about it. I just don't know if they recognize the flip side of it's like, it'd almost be like saying, I don't want Google to index my website. It feels like that to me. It's like, I don't want Google to index my website. It's like, well, then you pretty much don't exist. Like in a place where, billions of people are searching every day for answers to questions, and you're in the business of giving people answers to questions, and you don't want to be on Google.
Well, it's clear where the world is going. Whether we like it or not, the world is going towards fewer borders, fewer lines, fewer disconnections between people, countries, and information. So if you want to remove yourself from that, you can, and you'll get some benefits from that, like along the lines of privacy, or maybe there's some other intrinsic benefits from that. What you won't get is the benefit of inclusion in all of the in your area. And so I think you just make up your mind. And again, this is just a personal decision. I would rather have my intellectual property out there, because I don't, aside from my book, I feel like my intellectual property, the value that a lot of people get from me is when we have a conversation and we talk about something and we're creating something new in the moment. And that's different. Like you can't steal that. It's just you have to be me, or you have to be you, or you have to be whoever's listening to this to have that. I mean, that's part of being a human versus a bot.
Yeah, the application of the theory. Like, the theory is one thing, but if all people needed was information, everyone would be a billionaire with washboard abs. It's like, here's what you do. Yeah. Just do it. But it's like, nah, I can't make myself do it, or whatever. Like, that's where a coach comes in, or that's where an advisor comes in, or that's where a teacher or whatever. So somebody that can then help you apply the information so that it produces results, like kind of like it's dehydrated almost, and they need to just add water.
Tang.
Ew.
Kool-Aid?
Yeah, drink the Kool-Aid. That's more like it. Cool. All right, that's probably a good place to leave it. So, folks, let us know what you think about ChatGPT, and if we should do any kind of follow-up episode. I always love to do a tactical episode now and again. We could get into something like that. Or
I'd love to hear more about people's use cases. Like, what have you discovered with it that you think other people should know?
That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Great. All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark,
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
and we hope you join us again next time for the Business of Authority. Bye.
Bye bye.